Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel, The Medieval Reader. So today I'm doing the second language tag. I was tagged by Crystal at BiblioAtlas. She is the creator of this tag, and she tagged me because I am a PhD student in French, and I am also currently learning Latin. And language is something that I'm very passionate about. I really enjoy giving tips to others who are also trying to learn a second or a third language or a fourth language. And I just think it's like a puzzle. It's like detective work. It's what I love about research. I really enjoy language learning. There are 8 questions in this tag, but I will only be answering 6 because the last 2 questions are for non-native English speakers and YouTubers who make videos in another language other than English. So let's begin. Question 1. Where are you from and where do you live now? I am from the United States and I live in the United States. What's your native language and what other languages do you know? So my native language is English, but Farsi was actually, my native language would be Farsi, which is the language spoken in Iran. But when I was 9 years old, because a bunch of children were bullying me in school, I quit speaking Farsi. I could read Farsi, speak it, write in it even, and I quit. And so now I know nothing. I think I can write my first name and I know a few words, mostly insults in Farsi, but that's about it. So my native language, I guess, is English. It is the language that I have been speaking as far back as I can remember. And then I learned French beginning in 1st grade, and now I am a PhD student in French, and I have been learning Latin for the last 2 years. I just finished this very intensive Latin for reading knowledge course, and in 6 weeks I had class 3 hours a day, 4 days a week, and then I was also taking this 2-hour manuscript class 3 days a week at the same time, which, while crazy, I'm really glad I did. And now I've been practicing Latin an hour and a half every day on that text that I made a video some months ago saying that I was going to read, and that's Niels Klim's Underground Journey or Underground Travels by Ludvig Holberg. I will link it down below. I just recently finished reading the preface, the apologetic preface, and I started chapter 1 today, so I'm learning a lot of Latin through reading, which of course is really the only way I'm learning Latin at this point. Although, in my undergraduate institution, the University of Kentucky, they have a master's program entirely in active Latin, which means that the professors teach in Latin, the students write in Latin, and of course they read in Latin. It's really cool. It's one of the only programs of its kind in the country. But I am not doing active Latin, I am doing Latin for reading knowledge. How did you learn your second language? Tips for learning a second language. So, like I said, I started when I was 6, and when I was in 1st grade, of course, we weren't introduced to grammar, we were just introduced to some basic expressions, bonjour, je m'appelle, comment t'appelles-tu, those kind of expressions. I learned some school supplies, so un stylo, which is a pen, or un crayon, which is a pencil, une table, which is a table, those kind of things. And then when I was in 5th grade, they did this program, it was called Sim Talk, where the teacher had cutouts of a number of different characters. And then we learned how to say different things with the characters. So for example, I think one of the characters' names was Gérard, and so we said Gérard va à l'école, which means Gérard goes to school. We didn't need to know how to conjugate the verb aller, which is to go. We just need to know that va à l'école means go to school. And because we were only talking about another person, we only need to know the 3rd person singular form. So that was a great way of learning. I started formally learning grammar when I was in 7th grade. Then in 8th grade, I was in year 2 of the French grammar. I had to retake it in high school. I had this amazing French teacher, actually 2 French teachers, one who just got me so excited about French, and we got to read Le Petit Nicolas, which is a series of short stories about this little boy named Nicholas who narrates to us his experience in school, in his family, and it's written, the author is René Goscinny, who was the author of Astérix and Obélix, the comic strip. And I really wanted to read those stories. I would spend my time outside of class reading other stories that we weren't assigned because they were so cute, they were so much fun. And so that's my biggest tip, is find something that you really want to read that is fun, however you define that. And once you know the basic grammar, you should know the basic grammar before trying to read something, but once you know the basic grammar, then try to tackle the text. I really did need to take this summer intensive course on, in Latin before I could really read Holberg's text, Niels Klim's Underground Journey. I realized that my grammar was not good enough, but once you have intermediate grammar, just pick up something you really want to read, and it will excite you enough that you will want to go back to it every day. And I set my timer for an hour and a half, and when it goes off, I'm done. I finish. Sometimes, right now, because it's summer, I have more time. Well, I didn't a few weeks ago, but now I have more time since the class is over, and I can spend maybe 2 hours, or even more, if I wanted to. But after an hour and a half, I'm good. I think that's a reasonable amount of time. I learned a lot of new expressions. So, for example, my particular research interests are in the late Middle Ages and the early Renaissance. So the Latin that's used is known as NeoLatin. So someone like Desiderius Erasmus is a very famous Neo-Latinist. And so what these humanists would do is they would read the classical authors and then they would adopt certain expressions. But also they had vocabulary that they were using that didn't exist in the classical world. So there's a lot of new things in Neo-Latin that didn't exist in classical Latin. And because Holberg's satire / travel narrative was written in the 18th century, there is a lot of Neo-Latin. And it's been challenging, but the internet is your friend. And the Lewis and Short Dictionary, which is available on Perseus, on the Perseus website. I will link bunch of resources below for you. At least for Latin, Perseus, you just put in whatever form of the verb, and then it will tell you what verb it is, or what noun it is, or what adverb, or whatever, and then it'll link you to the entry in the Lewis and Short Latin dictionary, the Latin English dictionary, and it's great. I definitely recommend that website. But yeah, so I did this in French, and now I'm doing this in Latin. I definitely think the best way to learn a language, at least for reading knowledge, is to read. I mean, you will encounter way more useful, pertinent vocabulary through reading than you ever will from just memorizing a bunch of vocabulary in your grammar textbook. You do need to know the grammar, but the vocabulary is something you learn through reading. Okay, that was a really long answer. Number 5. Advice for others who are thinking of starting a channel in a second language. So I actually made a few videos in French when I first started BookTube, and I have considered making reviews again in French for the French lit that I read, especially because it just helps me practice my spoken French. So I do think I'm going to do that. I don't have a lot of tips for people who want to make videos in a second language. I would say if you want to improve your speaking skills, the lyrics of songs that you enjoy. I mean, I learned so much from just listening to French music that I really, really enjoyed. Much older singers. I know a lot of people like more modern music, but I was really into 60s, 70s, 80s music, so I will link a few names below if you're interested in French music. And the lyrics were very beautiful, very poetic. I learned a lot of vocabulary that way, and these tunes were so catchy, at least to me, that I would be singing them over and over again, and so that was just a great way to improve my speaking skills. I would also say, watching Netflix shows or watching YouTube videos, that's great too. There are French booktubers, and French booktube is, there are quite a few French booktubers. I will Again, link below some of my favorite French booktubers. I've always wondered whether it was possible for me to be able to be both in the French and the English-speaking booktube communities, especially because non-native English speakers are in the English booktube community, so I wonder whether I can also straddle the divide. And number 6 is, do you film in only one language? Again, when I first started, I did film in both English and French, mostly in English, but right now I'm only filming in English, but I do hope to begin in the fall making videos about French lit in French. In addition to English, I do want to continue to introduce French literature to English speakers. And so that is the tag. The only booktuber I can think of tagging whom I don't think Crystal tagged is Steve Donahue. And here's the thing. Steve has told us that he knows a number of languages, and I know that he's lived in a lot of different places. But I really want more. I want to know what are the order. How did he learn the languages? What's the order in which he learned the languages? There will be many bleak and barren Sundays in the future, Steve, so if you're watching, I think you should do this tag. I think I'm not the only one who would love to hear your responses to this tag. Thank you, Crystal, for tagging me, and thank you everyone for watching, and I will talk to you later. Bye now.